The Book of Cowboys by Hulling C. Hulling. I had this book when I was a kid. It was actually my brother's book, but I loved it. Here is the inside cover, which is a map of the United States. And the part that we will be interested in is here. Okay. And then part of the story, the very first part, is over here. Part of the story comes from old Mexico. And I can't see what I'm looking at. Okay. So, part of the wonderfulness of this book is the drawings, apparently by Hulling C. and Lucille Hulling. This is our table of contents with more drawings. Ooh. I don't know whether you can see that or not, but there you go. You can always pause a video and study something in detail. And then this is the foreword. And here's another drawing. And tell you what, I'll just hold up the foreword and you can read it for yourself later. The important part is here. And look at the picture, of course. I might just scan the pictures and show them as slides, whatever. A ranchman comes to town, Chapter 1. Peter and Barbara Ann Brandon lived in a tall apartment house in New York. From the windows of their home, they could look down on the tops of trees growing in Central Park. Every morning before they left for school and every afternoon when they came home, they took their Scotch Terrier Biff for a run through the park. And that was the only exercise and fresh air Biff got all through the spring and fall and winter. In summer, the family moved to East Hampton on Long Island, where they had a cottage not far from the ocean. This was the way the children had been living ever since they could remember, and neither of them ever thought much about any other sort of life. Until one day, Uncle Harry blew in, as he said, from his ranch in New Mexico. Peter and Barbara Ann were doing their lessons in the living room late one afternoon when the doorbell rang. "It's Mother. I'll let her in," shouted Peter, jumping up. "No, I'll let her in," said Barbara Ann. They raced down the hall. But Nora, getting dinner in the kitchen, was nearest the door and opened it as they ran up. She was so surprised that she stepped back a little, for it was not Mrs. Brandon at all. But a man so tall that he seemed to fill the whole doorway. "Does Mrs. Brandon live here?" he asked politely, taking off his hat. Peter noticed that the hat was the kind of big, soft felt the cowboys wore in the movies. Yes, sir, Nora answered, but she's not at home just now. Be careful turning the pages so as not to miss one. And we have a picture of this man with his hat. Well, that's too bad, said the stranger in a big, cheerful voice, as though he were used to speaking out of doors instead of in the hallway of an apartment. I bet I know who you are, shouted Peter, pushing in front of Nora. The tall stranger bent down until his face was almost on a level with Peter's. Who am I? He asked in a sort of growl, but his eyes were smiling. I'll bet you're Uncle Harry, said Peter. Right first time, said the stranger, straightening up. I'm Mrs. Brandon's brother. I'm Mrs. Brandon's brother, he explained to Nora. I'll go in and get acquainted with my niece and nephew while I'm waiting. Nora took the big hat from his hand, and he reached down and lifted Barbara Ann to his shoulder. She was so high that her head almost touched the ceiling as he walked toward the living room. A ball of black fur unrolled itself in Father's armchair, and Biff opened one eye. When he saw a strange man with Barbara on his shoulders, he got down and jumped about, making swift darts at Uncle Harry's feet. Arr, 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 he barked. And what's this? Uncle Harry asked, lifting Barbara from his shoulder and bending over to look at the excited little animal. That's our dog, Biff, said the children together. Oh, a dog, exclaimed Uncle Harry, then straightening up and began to laugh. Before they knew it, Peter and Barbara Ann were laughing with him. Biff seemed to find a joke too and barked joyfully while jumping and squirming all around them in circles. He's a fine watchdog, said Uncle Harry, waiting until I got into the house to bark at me. Oh, he's no good as a watchdog, Peter replied. He'd sleep through anything. He's just a pet. Barbara Ann had dropped down on the floor beside Biff. Never mind, Biffy, she said. I don't see anything to laugh at in you. Uncle Harry stopped smiling and looked really sorry. Shucks, he said, I didn't mean to hurt his feelings or yours. I like dogs a lot, but I've seldom seen such a small one with such short legs. He sat in Father's armchair and picked Biff up with one of his big hands. Look out, shouted Peter. Sometimes he nips strangers. But Biff had snuggled down against Uncle Harry's vest and, putting out his little black tongue, began to lick his hands. Black tongue? What dog is this? This is how Mother and Father found the newly made friends when they came home, and from then on until they sat down to Nora's good dinner, there was a continual hubbub of voices and laughter, with Biff joining in whenever he found an opening. I wonder if Family Affair was based on this book. And why in the world haven't you visited us before? Mother was saying. It has been 8 or 9 years since you came east. Just 8 years, Uncle Harry replied. Peter was a little fellow running around, and Barbara was still in the cradle. So they're not twins. He smiled around the table. It isn't that I haven't thought of you all often enough, he said, but I just never seem to find time to leave the West. Between my ranch in New Mexico and my other one in Montana, it keeps me on the jump looking after them, and I seldom get out of sight of the Rocky Mountains. And besides, said Mother, smiling back at him, you don't like the city. To tell the truth, Uncle Harry admitted, you're right. I like plenty of room, and I dislike crowds unless they're crowds of cattle and horses. And the reason I'm here is to take you all, bag and baggage, back west with me for the summer. How about it? Peter caught his breath. This was too good to be true. It was Barbara who said the first words, and they were, "Can we take Biff?" "You can bring anything you want," Uncle Harry assured her. "There's miles and miles of land out in New Mexico." We have another picture. From then on, all was confusion, with everyone wanting to talk at once, but Father got a word in. "How about East Hampton?" he asked. "New Mexico is a desert country, and there won't be any ocean for you youngsters to swim in." "Who cares about an ocean when you can go to a real ranch?" cried Peter. "We've been at the seashore ever since we're born. We'd rather be cowboys." "Well, I haven't got any objections," said Father. "I will have to come back to my business sometime during the summer, but I'll go out with you. Harry Morton will take you up on your proposition." So it was arranged. And soon the whole family, including Biff, had left Nora in charge of the apartment and boarded a train for faraway New Mexico. It was a fast train that carried them toward the place where the sun sets, and every day Peter and Barbara Ann saw new places. The lessons they had learned, the lessons they had studied in their geographies began to come alive. The train rushed through forests, roared over bridges, climbed puffing up one side of high ridges, and slid easily down the other side. Small towns and large cities and farms flashed by, and then they were on the open plains with red cattle grazing and men on horseback looking as small as toy soldiers. They were so far away. "Those are the first real cowboys," said Uncle Harry, pointing to the men on horseback. "You'll see plenty of them soon." And there's a picture. And that concludes Chapter 1. Next up, Chapter 2.